I got invited to do a talk at LMU earlier this year. Now, I can show up and retread an old marketing or culture talk any day of the week. But whenever I get invited to do a new talk, I'm invested in creating value for the audience. They're giving me their most valuable, unrenewable resource, which is time. So I want to show up like a pro. I asked my assistant Hannah, who had recently graduated from college, what would she have liked to hear from a talk last year when she was in school? And she said these three things: uncertainty, how to live with it; perseverance, how to learn it; and purpose, how to live it. I said, that's great, so that's what I'll cover. I focused the talk on purpose, how to live it, and really this idea of celebrating the work over the results, which I talk about all the time. If your purpose is to love your work and celebrate it, then every day you get to work is a gift. The hilarious thing about this talk was I was getting ready to walk on stage. It was an auditorium of 300 people. I was expecting it to be full, but only 30 people showed up, which I understand because when I was in college, this was probably the last thing I would have done on a Tuesday night. And I laughed to myself because I'm walking on stage getting ready to talk about celebrating the work or the results, and I'm really glad that I do because that place was empty. If I didn't celebrate the work or the results, it would have been a miserable time and I wouldn't have been living to authenticity. I could have cared less. The reality was the people that were there loved it and they told me so. And that's all that matters. At goodr, one of our strategic anchors is our people and our culture. And our culture is designed to get everyone here to celebrate the work over the results. Let's talk about it.
Welcome to the Culture Goodr podcast with Stephen Leese and Shaun Tinney. This podcast is a behind-the-shades look at creating and changing culture inside of goodr sunglasses. You can live with the status quo, you can challenge the status quo, or you can do what we do at goodr and status the quo challenge.
All right, so we're back. We're talking about celebrating the work over the results. Before we jump in, let's do a quick lightning round. What do you think?
Oh, let's do it.
Ready? All right. Dawn or dusk?
Ooh, dawn.
All right. Card game or board game?
Oh, cards for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Scale of 1 to 10, how good of a driver are you?
If I'm present, 9. I mean, I don't know, probably a 7 most of the time.
Fair. Favorite restaurant in the LA?
Oh, you know this. It's Hama Sushi.
Yeah. I thought right away, which is a solid choice. Yeah. Very solid. What's one thing you're a pro at?
Oh, I mean, I would say communication. I'm pretty solid at.
Have to go ahead and agree with you.
Yeah, what
there.
do you think?
Yep. I mean, vision for sure. We'll talk about that in another episode.
Yeah.
So let's dive in.
Perfect.
Cool. So since we're talking about professionalism today, can you kick us off with your thoughts on the difference between being a pro and an amateur?
Yeah, I mean, there's any different ways to approach this, but professionals love what they do. Amateurs do what they love. Mm-hmm. And there's this whole idea that we talk about at goodr is taking pride in your work. One of the pillars of fun is professionalism, and we describe it as taking pride in your work. And for me, this goes everywhere. The small things really matter. We use a ton of presentations, and having a dialed presentation deck for everything you do is essential, right? Mm-hmm. The fonts are the same. The images are cropped appropriately. Those little things add up to big results in the end. Because if you can't do those fundamentals, how do you expect to be able to perform on the biggest stage? I think it's just really important. I think another thing about taking pride in your work is not being afraid to throw away bad work. Mm-hmm. I mean, I throw away talks all the time. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever thrown away a podcast episode.
TBD.
I don't think so. But I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of what it is to me. How about you?
Yeah, same. And when you were talking about the slides right away, I'm thinking, if a presentation isn't quite dialed in, I don't get to focus on the content. I'm like, that bullet point is just floating there with nothing in it, and that distracts me, gets my attention instead. So it's like, man, those little things really do add up to making the bigger things even more impactful, right?
Oh, for sure, right? Imagine going on a first date and the person has a coffee stain on their shirt and they're just not talking about it. I can't function with this going on. But I mean, and it is everything. Hey, whatever you get to do that day, taking pride in it, and it's more than decks for me, right? It's Excel's. If I'm doing an Excel, it needs to function properly. If there's a formula off, that needs to be fixed, right?
Yeah.
That is something that I can't live with. And it's not really perfectionism. It is just about delivering a really, really high quality, because it is a slippery slope when you start cutting corners.
Yeah, for sure. If you want something to be sound, it's got to be that way, top to bottom, right? Yeah. I feel like we make fun look easy here, but it's actually a ton of work. How does preparation play into professionalism at goodr?
Well, I mean, think about this. The more prepared you are, the more fun you can have. I've talked about this before, but right, if I'm going to Vegas, which I'm going with some friends, or any trip, having reservations at the restaurant you want to go to, right? Having things built in so that when you show up, you are able to have the most fun. The office here is super dialed and has this wild tropical vibe, but it's very, very professional. And like that takes a lot of work so everybody here can show up and really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And right, because like being stressed is really not fun. So the more work that you can do ahead of time means you can have more fun in the moment.
Yeah, so preparation unlocks presence in a way.
Yeah, I did a storytelling workshop, which I know you know, and was talking to the presenters about the Killer song, Human, which is like, are we human or are we dancer?
Yeah.
And that song's about this idea of once you do your art enough, whether that's dancing, whether that's accounting, whether that's speaking, and whether when you're in it and you are good and you are prepared, you actually stop being a human, you become an artist or a musician or insert word. And that comes from tons of preparation so that you can show up present and like let it rip.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember reading something from Bruce Lee, and he was saying at some point, like, I'm no longer hitting it hits on its own, right?
That's right.
Yeah, just get that many reps in and it all works. So one of our goals is to hire the fewest number of people coached to the highest level. And that means we've got to set our standards pretty high from the start.
Yeah, for sure. The nice thing about professionalism, it's coachable. Actually, everything we talk about is coachable, right? These are all learned skills.
Yeah.
And we do a good job in the hiring process. We have, how many stages is it?
Oh, depending on the role, 5 to 7.
Yeah, and we have culture calls up front to set expectations. We have multiple in-person interviews. The final interview is an assignment that people have to present.
Yeah.
And in there, we're not looking for perfection. We're just looking for, did this person take this seriously? Because if they're showing up to a job interview when they're not taking it seriously, then fuck knows what's going to happen 2, 3, 4 months down the road.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think it starts with hiring, and then from the beginning, onboarding, we teach people how to make presentations. We teach these skills, and then we are pretty diligent about being on it.
For sure. Along those lines, that makes me wonder, like, what do you think isn't teachable? Like, what's got to be hired for that's more or less natural?
Oh, man. I don't know. I think most everything is teachable. I think obviously there's levels of talent underneath it. Anybody can learn to play golf. Not anybody can be on the PGA Tour.
Right.
And I think that's a very real thing. But when you if you're just to go through our pillars, right, from professionalism to ownership to communication to gratitude, it's all teachable if somebody wants to learn it.
Yeah.
I see. So what's not teachable is if somebody doesn't want to learn, like fixed mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
that's what I was thinking. It's like drive, right? Because you can work, like if the fire is not lit, you can't light it for them. But if there's a little spark there, you can fan the flames. And
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in interviews right now for people. How's the professionalism that you see?
Mostly solid across the board.
Yeah.
The one thing that gets me, pro tip, it's goodr, not goodr. So if you're coming into an interview and you got that far and you're saying the company name wrong, that's not professional.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it's really interesting to see the way that everyone approaches the final deck assignment. We leave it pretty open intentionally to see how well people follow directions and how kind of like their mind approaches solving a problem.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, the beginnings of potential for something that will ultimately be coachable, but it's cool to see where people are from the jump.
Yeah, I mean, to your Bruce Lee comment, we'll stick on presentations because I think it's an easy thing for people to say, "Oh, I'm not good at decks. I'm not good at making presentations."
Right.
Well, that's a learned skill, and if you do it enough, you don't even think about it. I mean, think about it now. When you put together a deck, do you actually think about like it just happens?
Yeah.
Right. You're not thinking about like, oh, is this image right? Like you just know if it is or if it isn't.
Yep.
You know if the fonts are on. So you do anything enough, it just becomes a habit.
Yeah, it's wild how much of our work happens in that way to the point where, yeah, you're right. I'm not thinking about the structure of the thing anymore. I'm just like, all right, how do I communicate this within this framework?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. What do you notice about our approach to hiring and onboarding that lead to great performance within a role?
Ooh, give that to me again.
Yeah. So what do you notice about the way that we approach our hiring and our onboarding that lead to great performance within a role? Is there something that we're doing that sets people up for success?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do a really good job up front of hiring. You're never going to get it right. Also, it is a really small slice of people, or you're in a really small slice of a person in that. I think the thing that we're really good about is we have constant feedback loops, right? Actually, let me take a step back. We do a really good job hiring. We have really diligent onboarding, right? The first week of your job here at goodr, you don't even touch your role. You're learning about all of our culture and how to operate inside of goodr. And then when you get out into the world, there is resources here for people to learn. And so if 3, 6, 9 months in, they're not getting it, they don't want to get it. And we don't let it slide.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild. I'll tell this story in a diplomatic way.
Okay.
We just were at goodr Stock, which is our quarterly summit. And it was up at Lake Hughes at a camp, and it was awesome. And we had a band up there and was talking to just different people throughout the couple of day retreat. And I had 3 different people at this company who had been hired in the last year make a comment in the world of like how much they love goodr and the culture. And one of the things they love is how everybody here is held accountable and how no one gets to slide. And that's a wild thing to think about. I think people think that you want to create a world where you don't hold people accountable. Actually, everybody loves it. And everybody notices it, right? People notice like nobody gets to slide here.
Yeah.
And so that is built in. And so either you level up or you get out.
For sure. In fact, a reference from today, we have our Carl's Gold Stars channel, right? Where we kind of like look out for things. Yeah, exactly. Show gratitude. So today, Dan just pitches this idea for Carl's Flock Ups channel, right? Now it exists. And I thought, he'll put a couple things in there and we'll see what happens. I tune in like 10 minutes after it exists and it's already full. Like I already have to scroll. Everyone's just piling in being like, I fucked this up. I did this and I did that. Like, oh man, what a relief. Like everyone is owning their shit and it's kind of funny.
Yeah, right. And so we also teach ownership, right? So we demand professionalism. We give people the tools to be professional. We teach ownership and celebrate it so that when somebody's not professional and you give them feedback, they're actually prepared to level up. I mean, it happened very recently with someone here where I gave them pretty hard feedback and they came back a week later and had completely flipped around the project they were working on. And they thanked me. They're like, hey, I want to thank you for that because I would not have got there without that. Yeah. And right. And so like this is a giant ecosystem or a stew that keeps, the flavors keep enhancing. Yeah. But if you don't like stew, this is not the place for you.
Right. For sure. Yeah. And you got to be willing to go, that's missing something.
Yeah.
Need a little more salt. Yeah. All right. You might have kind of covered this a little bit. What kinds of things do you see that lead to people struggling within a role versus thriving?
Oh, man. I think going back to the world of celebrating the work over the results, they want to go to the result immediately. Right? Yeah. That idea of at goodr, there's no corner office. You're not gonna have a secretary with your own spot. It just doesn't exist here. And so it used to be you show up to a corporate job and you grind and you become a manager, then a director, then a VP.
Right.
And that's not the type of place we are, and we'll never be that. And so if you are trying to get the next big thing, or you're focusing on winning the awards instead of just loving the work, it catches up with you here, right? It is something that's really noticeable. What do you see? I mean, you're close to this.
Oh, definitely. I think people that aren't willing to ask questions, to admit when they don't know something, to recognize that there's no point at which you're expected to know absolutely everything, and actually asking questions is a trust-building power move, right? So there's that. And then also like being willing to receive feedback without explaining, defending, whatever it is, where you're just like, got it, thank you, instead of like, oh, that happened because of this and this. It's like, that doesn't matter. We're just trying to prevent it from happening again.
Agree with all those. In this thing of not wanting to being okay with the status quo, right? When in the product meeting, the product team's like really dialed. We look this up all the time. You look at a glass and the graphics are off. It's like, all right, is that us or is that the factory?
Right.
Which one is it?
Yeah.
And doing the work to make things right. So cutting corners is a way to is not a good thing here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the Six Sigma thing where like if there's one like bolt that doesn't fit, they stop the whole production line. Like, where's the problem here? You know, like how many times does that happen before they figure it all out?
Oh, for sure. And right, this ties back into people too. If you don't hold everybody accountable, then nobody's held accountable.
Yeah.
It's all or nothing.
Yep. That's true. And then it just turns to chaos and all that stuff. Well, pretty much everything at goodr lives in a deck or exists because of one, right? Like so much of our work is there. Why do you feel like that format took off so much? Why is that so prevalent here?
I mean, it was. I mean, I drove it, number one, right? So a lot of the things I've talked about this recently, where I'm very aware that everything we do inside the culture here at goodr is because it is usually my preference, and so I want to acknowledge that. But I think it resonates with people for a lot of ways. One, we are trained to look at a computer screen, right? We're trained to look at that. Was it 1080 by 1920? And so that is our standard way. So it's comfortable. It's a great way to organize thoughts, where you get like one thought on a page, and you can break things up. So it's a really amazing way to spread ideas. But I do think that there are cons to it at times. I mean, even when I was preparing for the episode today, I was actually thinking, I'm like, you know what? We might want to put these in a doc, because when you have to type a bunch, when it's word focused, it's not visual. Then decks kind of suck because you're doing it. But then the last thing is, we're a very vibrant company, and so we have an amazing deck template, and we have these incredible images to support it. So it takes the most boring, mundane ideas and projects and instantly makes them fun, which is really powerful.
Yeah. I was thinking of like that whole thing of like death by PowerPoint, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's like we've got like basically life and work by Google Slides at this point.
Yeah.
But the templates help a ton because you have these really well considered points of entry, right? You're thinking through certain things, wild success, the NASA checkpoints, and then we have templates for ways of presenting certain things. So I think we're giving people a pretty good push in that general direction.
Yeah, for our listeners out there, we use G Suite, so Google Slides. Most every product is in there. We have this deck template with a bunch of different options for pages. We have thousands, probably tens of thousands of fun images that are pre-cropped to fit inside the deck. In onboarding, you go through a class on like junior varsity deck making. Then once you graduate that to a higher level. So we give people the tools to live inside this world. And it is really fun once you're in it. And also it's shareable, right? We all can access it. We can all look at it at the same time or at different times. And so it's an amazing tool to like create like cohesion too.
Yeah. And then someone, usually it's Kelly, but they'll do something and then be like, "Oh, this would be a good template." And then boom, we send out a template. Everybody fills this out, and then instant cohesion across flocks, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. On that note, not that one exactly, but maybe a slightly different direction. We've got relatively high expectations for polish on all our presentations. And a while back, Barrett came up with a fun term to help us point out the things that don't look so good. What is that, and how do we use it?
Well, it's salty feet. I actually believe it was Barrett and Duncan. So
oh yeah. All right.
Two people on our team. They're on our content team, and Barrett was telling the story about, he was talking to the team about, there was a bunch of cords out in one of the spaces here, and he goes, "Hey, we got to clean this up. Actually, we should think of a word for sloppy work like this that we know Steven's going to hate." And as he told the story to me, it doesn't matter if you think it's fine or if everybody here thinks it's fine. You know for a fact he's not going to like it.
Right.
And so let's fix it and let's create a term. What's a term? Maybe something flamingo related. And Duncan goes, I mean, salty feet, because, flamingos, if they don't move quick enough on salt flats, their feet salt up and they break off and die. And so you do not want salty feet. It's a bad thing. And so it's a really fun way to take the edge off a deck that has, the image, it's slightly off cropped that everybody can see when it's on a giant screen. You're like, hey, you got to fix that salty feet.
Yeah, right.
And so it's actually become into a really, I love it, although it was designed for me, but it is a really fun way to just address something that's sloppy without being a dick about it. Because as soon as you say it, and people, the thing is now we're a really self-aware, self-governing company. So all the time, I'll even do it like, "Oh man, salty feet on this, I'm sorry."
Right.
So you just know it right away.
Oh yeah, totally. It's great to have that shared language. Yeah, like you said, you don't feel like a jerk. It's easy to point it out and feels more or less neutral, but leaning toward funny.
Yeah, I mean, and we're focusing a lot on decks here, but this goes across the board, right? Expensify. This is how anybody gets reimbursed for expenses. You have to fill it out in the appropriate way and have the receipt, or accounting is on your shit. We have this amazing creative team that serves as basically an agency, and you fill out a brief. If you don't fill out the brief with the information they ask for, they're like, hey, refill it out.
Yeah.
And so we're hyper focusing on decks because I think a lot of people can relate to building a presentation, but this is ingrained in every team in many different ways.
For sure. So on that note, beyond decks, the part of professionalism is the way that we present, right? Storytelling, presentation skills in general. How does that fit into our expectations of professionalism at goodr?
Yeah, I mean, I think that going back to, hey, if you really want to show up like a pro, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing it, and who are you doing it for? Because getting on stage and rambling off into oblivion is not for anybody but yourself. And what's the quote? If you need me to talk for an hour, I can go right now. If you need me to talk for 5 minutes, I need a couple days.
Yeah,
right.
At least like a week. Yeah,
yeah.
It's like the shorter I'm speaking, the longer I need to prepare.
And so there's a lot of understanding that like the preparation. I taught a storytelling workshop for goodr stock. So goodr stock came, the camp that we just talked about. This thing I've been saying for the past year or longer. I want more voices at goodr stock. I want more people speaking. So for those quarterly summit, all team meeting. Usually I'll do a talk, or the flock stars, which is like our department heads will talk, or even like the team leads. And I've wanted more people at goodr to get up in front of the company and speak, but I didn't do a good enough job of creating the space to coach people to get to that level. Because just expecting people to get on stage, deliver a 15-minute talk on the vision of their department when they're, maybe entry level, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years into their role is not a fair expectation.
Yeah. And
so took a step back and made a 4-month storytelling workshop, and one person from every department, they had to opt in. So right away, with somebody who's opting in, they want to be there.
Yep.
You're gonna get professionalism, and the expectation is set of like, hey, this is a dial talk via TED Talks. And so you have 4 months, I'm gonna get you ready. And leading up to it, adding in rehearsals, because I didn't ask them to get off book soon enough, and so I fucked that up. And like, no, I'm inserting more. I need to put in another rehearsal because this needs to be dialed. And it needs to be dialed for a bunch of reasons. For sure, we live in professionalism, but really, for me, it went back to there was 7 presenters and an MC. These 8 people are spending 4 months working on this. They get on stage in front of the entire company, friends and colleagues, and I would not be doing my job as a leader if I did not prepare them. And it is quite irrelevant how much time it took at that moment, what type of direct feedback I had to give them, because I know what it feels like to crush that, and I wanted to recreate that for them. And so that right there is a perfect example of professionalism, because like everybody showed up in different ways, dialed and taking feedback, like really striving to be great at something. And I don't know, I think they did.
Oh man, they absolutely did. Those were all so impressive, and people every single one got a standing ovation, and for good reason. I think one of the things that's great, maybe this is an aspect of the way we approach professionalism here, is we're constantly iterating and saying, okay, well, what worked, what didn't work, carry forward the things that did, try to drop the things that didn't. So even in this little microcosm here of the speaking workshop, right? What do you think went really well, and then what would you change running this thing again?
Yeah, I mean, it went great all in all. I think that we're going to be doing an OWLs, which is how we review something. And so we'll look at it. I think that some of the stuff up front, it was a 4-month thing. And basically the first 2 months was fundamentals and the last 2 months was the talk. I think I would shrink the fundamentals time to give us more time to work on the talk. I think I would have done a better job of setting the expectation to everyone of how much work they're going to have to do. Because giving a talk is a habit for me. I don't actually think about how much work goes into it.
Right.
One, I can do it quicker than people who are untrained. But even me, I didn't do a good enough job of being like, hey, this is going to dominate the last 3 weeks.
Right.
So I'd set better expectations. I would get people off script sooner because this wild thing happened, Shaun, where people doing these presentations, reading from script, I'm like, hey, you got to get off. In 1 week, it went from people who were doing great to awful. Everybody fell apart.
Yeah.
Because they're memorizing a talk is a whole different level.
Yeah.
And so I would have forced that awkward moment sooner to give them more time to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all in all, those are things. Just building more time, setting better expectations. And other than that, I mean, I don't know. I think it went really, really well. And it's a really interesting lesson. They all in that moment, they got to learn how when they see their peers up there, what they went through.
Yep.
So they have appreciation. They understand now if they want to do something like this, what they need to do to prepare. And then there's huge lessons of like, who was the talk for? The talk's for the entire company. So although they were talking about specific things of their department, there was a constant feedback of like, hey, you got to cut that out. Like you care about that. The audience doesn't care about that.
Right.
And that's a really important thing to understand is who is your audience? What do they care about? How do you deliver value? Right? You and I are not going to get on here and talk about our breakfast because nobody gives a fuck.
That's right.
Right. So we're talking about the culture of the company. And so that, I mean, all in all though, it was one of the most amazing experiences that like I was ever a part of at this company, seeing those 8 people up there like crush it.
Oh yeah, absolutely agreed. And I only saw a part of the behind the scenes, but even just in 1 week, the amount of shift from like, okay, almost ready to staged ready was crazy. People invested a ton and it really paid off.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed you always do is, especially if you, like it's obvious you think someone crushed a presentation, you'll be like, what, how much time do you think you put into that? Right? Yeah. And it's funny because at first you might think, oh, if I say a lot, that's going to be somehow bad, you know, but like you always nod when they're like, I don't know, like 100 hours. You're like, yeah, probably seems like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's always more than you would think.
Yeah. So you're probably alluding to this story, which is, I don't know if you were there for this, but working on these talks, then 3 weeks before the talk, I'm like, hey, you have to be off book. Off book happened. And the next week, everybody were struggling. But what I watched on that stage was all the speakers watching them be mad at themselves because they're like, I didn't fucking prepare hard enough, right? And it was actually you have to go through that. You have to know. So then the next week, people showed up, and Hannah and Karen were the furthest along at that point. They were like doing the best. And I asked everybody 2 questions at the end of this, because at this point, time is coming fast and I have to ground them in reality. I asked them, how many times since last week did they run their talk? And on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you think you are at in your talk journey? 10 is you could get on stage at TED tomorrow and deliver it to 10,000 people. And 1 is, you haven't even started.
Right.
And I go, and actually, let's do a better metric. 9 means you need to work on this 1 hour a day for the next 7 days. 8 means you need to work on it 2 hours a day for the next 7 days. 7 is 3 hours a day. That's the thing. And everybody went around the room, and Hannah and Karen, who crushed it, Hannah was like, I did the talk 40 times in the past week. And I was like, yeah, I know, I can tell.
Yeah.
And nobody, and then Karen was 25 and everybody else was like 10 or 15. And then did this system, and people were, like, 8, 9, 7. And a couple of people who weren't where they needed to be said 8. And in front of the room, I go, I'll be very, very clear with you. You're at a 5.
Yeah.
And so that means in the next 7 days, you need to be spending 5 hours a day on this. I will clear the time with your team lead, so you have it, but let's just get on the same page. And that was a gift to all of us, being able to understand what your peers went through to get to where they are. So there was no illusion of, how do I get there? This is a taught skill. Just do it enough, you get there.
Yeah, for sure. And put in the reps, and then they did. And every single person walked up there with the confidence of, I've put in so much practice. I'm just going to basically watch myself deliver this thing. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I always joke that I don't want kids. Then I'll joke, I'm like, well, I got 130 kids. They're good as employees. But this was one of the most real experiences I imagine it's ever like to as a parent, like work really hard on something with a kid and see them go. I mean, although they're my peers, it was a wonderful, rewarding experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun to watch as well. We were at Space Camp, right, for that goodr stock. So in the spirit of fun, we framed all of our growth and sustainability or scalability projects in terms of space travel.
Yeah.
We're going to the moon, Mars, beyond. So can you speak to some of the thinking there and the NASA acronym you came up with?
Yeah, I'll try and keep this clean because it gets super confusing. When you come in from the outside world, internally, we are like lousy with space terms and stories. So last spring, one of the things I didn't do a good job for the first 5 years of the company was preparing us to scale. So like ops, those type of things. And a light got shined on it in 2020. And so early 2021, we're not where we need to be. We're still having trouble scaling. And I gave this talk because goodr is a rocket ship, and the talk was talking about how goodr is a rocket ship and we're going to the moon. And goodr is a rocket ship, and what I mean by that is we grow exponentially. We grow like 50% revenue-wise year over year.
Yeah.
That is fast.
That's
and
crazy.
so it was part of it was out of just like me being pissed, like, hey, why are we surprised? Goodr is a rocket ship and we're going to the moon. So I did that in spring goodr stock of 2021, and then in fall, all the leaders presented our growth and scale plans, and they designated revenue targets as planets. So 2022's revenue target was the moon.
Right.
Then next year's is Mars. And so we attached a number to it. So good as a rocket ship, we're going to the moon. And we pick one thing a year to focus on as a company. And this year, since the whole space thing, I'm like, it's more than just scale. There's other things involved here. Like where we weren't using insights, like we have so much data, we need to be using better data. We need to be more agile because although we are really diligent planners, we need to be able to act quickly. We need to be focusing on scale and accountability. And so I rolled out NASA, right? Insights, because we spell everything wrong here. Agility, scalability, accountability. So every project has a NASA check on the presentation. Like, what insights did you use? Is this agile? Are you prepared and excited to change quickly? Will this scale? How can this scale? And what are the accountability checkpoints? And so when we were going to camp, Hansu planned, I'm like, hey, let's make this theme Space Camp.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't really Space Camp. We didn't actually, go into space, but that's what it was. And so that's where NASA comes from.
Pretty sweet summer camp.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. What do you think the benefits we've seen from implementing the NASA checklist on all of our projects have been?
Well, what's wild is all the speakers that I worked with, their focus was working with their team leads on how is their department and their flocks living into NASA, like how are they using insights, agility, scalability, and accountability, and how to give examples. And so I think doing this fun thing, putting a focus on it, has pulled us all like in a singular motion, even to a point where I was talking to Mike, who's our creative director, about content.
Yeah.
And 3 times conversation, he's like, yeah, well, but he's like, this won't scale. And even down to that level, even how we're creating content and taking photographs, like it is top of mind. And so really you've just seen it. You've seen it we haven't ran out of product like we have in the past couple of years. Yeah. Even though we are hard workers, I feel so good when I look at our back-end operations, but this was a company effort to focus. Everybody has to answer those questions. How are you using insights, agility, scalability, and accountability? How is it going over in the people herd?
I mean, it's going awesome. I feel like the major update we made to the culture mastery side of things and teaching our values and living into them in ways that actually mean something is like, it went from, I had my like chaos board, what is it, conspiracy theory, thread going everywhere. I was like, okay, we're going to do this and that. And I'm like, oh man, this is just too much. It's not going to work. And then we got into a working session. You're like, what if we just scrap all that and we do this other thing and we get everyone on the same track all together? Yeah, that seems probably scalable.
Yeah, right.
I
mean, the work that you and the team have done with scaling our culture is incredible because, we created the whole pillar talks and like how do we create like a self-replicating culture, because we can't just keep hiring more coaches.
Right.
That doesn't scale.
Yeah.
And so even like culture, HR, creative is thinking this. So we are all now moving in one, and it is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny too. Even I'll hear someone like up at the mic trying to answer a question, and I'll be thinking agility. Just like use the formulas.
Yeah. Well, just like the salty feet, it is a fun thing to like, oh, this didn't pass the NASA check. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
We're super process oriented here generally. So just the idea of celebrating the work over the results seems like a process-oriented thing. Why do you think we focus so much on the process versus the results? I mean, the results are important, right? But
yeah, I mean, one, it's really hard to control certain results, right? We can control showing up every day and doing good work. We can't control getting awards, right? And so if you love what you do every day, whether that is whatever that is, like I said in the intro, if your goal is to celebrate the work and then you get to work every day, you've already won.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. But it goes back to, we have very little control over most things. We don't know how people really are going to interpret the creative we do. We don't know all this. So, but we do know we can show up, and we do know there's certain things we can do. We can make deck. We can like have a purpose statement. We can follow the NASA check. And so it's really this idea of let's control what we can. Because a lot of things we can't, and we don't need to stress about those things, because I believe if we just keep doing this stuff enough, we're going to be in a good place.
yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like the authenticity mantra, huh?
Yep, and yes, and yeah, right. If the goal is being liked and people don't like, if the goal is being authentic and people don't like you, it's okay.
Yep.
If the goal is being liked, people don't like you, you're fucked.
Exactly.
Yeah, we don't need to be liked. We just have to do things our way.
Yeah, that's right. Control what you can. Speaking of our way versus others, what do you think most companies miss when it comes to teaching or reinforcing professionalism?
Oh, probably fundamentals. Kelly on our team, she's gonna do a talk on professionalism and talking about John Wooden, and John Wooden, best coach of all time, UCLA, won 10 titles in 11 years, I think. The first hour of every season, we're talking the top recruits in the country, it was an hour on how to put on socks and shoes appropriately, and he did it painfully slow. And it's not about the socks and the shoes, but his thing is like, hey, if you don't put your socks and shoes on right, you get a blister. If you get a blister, you can't practice with our team. If you can't practice with our team, you don't know what's going on. And I think companies, they don't build the fundamentals. Like they don't give people the tools to do what they need to succeed. That's probably the top thing, and then the second would be no consistency.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How you do anything is how you do everything, and help people know how you want them to do things.
Yeah, exactly. How you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
So you better be dialed.
Right on. All right, so heading over to Circle Bar here, what's one thing you want to answer again or didn't get to bring up?
I mean, I just think this idea of really whatever you're doing, you should enjoy doing it. You spend so much time working. And if you don't love what you do, it is going to be a miserable existence. And at goodr, it's like it might be okay to not like 10% of your job, but if you hate 20% of your job, that's one day a week you're miserable in your work.
Yeah.
And that's not acceptable. And so really, when you kind of unpack celebrating the work or the results, it's just about finding joy in what you do so you can show up and be, more present, more creative, and do great work. That's really the rub here, like why you do this.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so for someone who's like, all right, that sounds great, Steven, what do I do now? Like advice, next actions, how do you turn this into reality?
Yeah, I mean, I would say take a step back and start noticing when you are in flow state. So start noticing when you're doing the work that you love. And maybe that's working in Excel. Maybe that is real-time problem solving. Start identifying the handful of things and be very general. Like for me, I love storytelling. So creating talks is a gift. I love real-time problem solving. So anytime these working sessions or anytime actually anybody has a problem, like I'm like, oh, let's do this.
Yeah.
And I love leadership and like identifying processes and systems to make everybody thrive. And so start noticing those things. Be very general. Like I don't like you notice how CEO is not on my list. That just happens.
Yeah.
And so identify what's in flow state. What are things that you can be doing more of? And try and work those into your everyday. And if that's not at your current job, then you go get another job. And that is the thing that I think other people, that's at the crux of this. If you don't like your situation, you can change that.
goodr.com/work.
Yeah, we're hiring like crazy.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Subscribe, send us your questions, and get episode extras at goodr.com/culture. Until next time, be excellent to each other.
Oh, and watch us on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. YouTube.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Goodr podcast. To submit questions for the podcast, learn more about our culture, and learn how you can status the quote challenge, head over to goodr.com/culture. And don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you're listening, including on YouTube, where you can now watch all of our new episodes. Who knows? You might even catch a glimpse of Carl at our headquarters if he's not already passed out at the tiki bar from all the margaritas.